you could have a problem, and it might make your transaction fall through and not occur, or it might cost you, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to clean things up in order to enable the transaction to go through. And, those are not ideal scenarios.
Hey, my name is Amol Nirgudkar. I'm here with my co-host, AJ Peak, and welcome to Healthcare 100. This is the ultimate playbook for scaling in healthcare. Each week, we sit down with operators, investors, innovators behind the fastest growing DSOs and MSOs and health tech platforms in all of healthcare, right? And unpack strategies, systems, capital structures that are driving real growth. And at the end, our guests get to share a $100,000 EBITDA idea that's going to help you drive 10x growth in the next 90 days or even less. With that in mind, this is the first of our podcast series, the 10x Blueprint, structuring your DSO for maximum value and multiples. And I have my good friend, Brian Colao, the director of the Dykema DSO group here, who is going to be, whose conference you're going to be at in August, from August 6th through 8th at the Gaylord Rockies in Denver. So Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks, Amol, and thanks, AJ. I really appreciate you guys having me here. And I'm really excited. Our event is looking like a complete sellout. We're going to have well over 2,000 people there, and your workshop is going to be a really big part of it. And I'm excited to sit down and chat with you.
Yeah, let's talk real quick. Let me get the first question off the bat right away. You've been in this industry for 30 years. You've done more deals than any lawyer on the planet in the space. And you have a very unique perspective on beyond the legal. You have a unique perspective on what works, what doesn't work, what's failed, what's succeeded. And so paint us a picture for our audience, and what's the legal structure that can make or break, right, the path to this 10x exit we're talking about, the big exit.
Yeah, there's a couple components to all this. The first is structure. The second is the agreements. One, you have to have a regulatory compliance structure. It can vary a bit from state to state. Certain states have some nuances to them. So, you want to make sure you have a regulatory compliance structure. Then, there's really actually three things. So it's number two would be the agreements. When you put a structure together, now you've got to have DSO business agreements, that go with that structure. And I've seen some people have messed it all up. Their structure's bad, their agreement's bad, and it's all a mess. Others, their structure looks good, but their agreements are wrong. That's another problem. You might think, oh, I did the right structure, but then you stuck the wrong agreements in and you're still having a problem. Finally, you might have the right structure and the right agreements, but in practice, you're not following those agreements. And that's a problem. So there's sort of three components to all this: the structure, the agreements, and the implementation of the agreements. And you don't want to mess any of them up. You want to have the structure correct, you want to have the agreements correct, and you want to follow your agreements. Because if you fall down on any of those three, you got the wrong structure, or got the right structure but the wrong agreements, or the right structure and the right agreements but you're not following up, you could have a problem, and it might make your transaction fall through and not occur, or it might cost you, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to clean things up in order to enable the transaction to go through. And, those are not ideal scenarios.
And there's state and federal laws here, right? There's state law. You have to comply with the state regulatory structure, and you have to comply with some federal regulatory structure. Or is it just state law?
Yeah, usually if you're talking about DSOs, which is my favorite topic, it's usually state law that you're going to comply with your structure and your contracts and your agreement. There are, of course, various federal laws that affect dental practices, things such as if you take Medicaid, you've got a bunch of federal statutes to worry about. So federal statutes could possibly come into play if you're taking Medicaid or participating in government programs. But if you're not doing any of that, it's mostly state laws.
Give some examples to the extent you can where, someone naively, a founder, multi-site, and they're ready to exit or sell. And then they, reach out to you for a little bit of help and it's worse than they thought in terms of what they set up and the outcome. I think just give people a flavor of that.
It happens all the time. We could spend a couple hours on it, but just a highlight, hit a few highlights. The structure's wrong. You got non-dentists owning dental practices. That's a very common one I see. Now there are 4 states that allow but 46 of them you can't. So the overwhelming majority of the time you can't. And you're in one of those states where you can't, and you've got non-dentists owning a dental practice. That would be an obvious structural thing that I look at. Or you've got a DSO that's owned by non-dentists employing dentists or employing hygienists. Maybe you've got, a dental practice down there, but they're working up here and they're employed by the wrong entity. So those are, there's others, but those are very, very common, structural things. In terms of agreement errors, most of it comes down to the fees. You're charging the wrong fee. The way you state your fee, it's incorrect. I've seen people have fees blank, like they didn't put any fee in there, which is, not compliant, or your agreement says one thing, the way you're actually charging it is a different thing. So, these are things, and it takes work, AJ. I know you've, built an organization, how much work it takes Amols in these organizations every day, getting the accounting right, sitting down and saying, what is the fee we're going to charge? And you have to think about it, and then charging that fee, and then every month accounting for it the appropriate way. Here's the expenses, here's the fees. And if we're audited, we can prove all this. That takes a lot of work, to get that right. And a lot of folks, and I understand, I don't judge anybody, they maybe didn't have a lot of resources when they founded their organization. They grew real quick. There's a lot of really good reasons why this could happen. But the bottom line is, if you find yourself in this situation, you really got to clean it up before you go to market.
And, the premise being that 10X blueprint, and there is now lots of different flavors of ice cream models, right, for DSOs. Maybe for our audience, give the lay of the land of the different models. And is there a right one? Like, the private equity, are buyers predisposed to one model versus another, as people are thinking about how to structure themselves for, a great exit someday?
What I say, AJ, to people, the answer is yes, there are preferable models. There are, period. And what I say to people is, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something.
And there are a number of things out there that I won't even go over here. I don't feel like I want to. It's not productive to do so, that are technically possible. Like, you could technically do it this way, but it ends up confusing and it costs more time and more money. And I've encountered a lot of people have chosen to do things certain ways. And it's like, just because you can do it this way doesn't mean you shouldn't. Sometimes I'll ask them, and here's the point I want to make, the real point. Like, I'll ask, why did you do it this way? Well, I didn't want to be like the other guy. I wanted to do my own unique structure. And they think maybe sometimes I'm going to be like, oh, terrific, that's great. What I actually say is, why not? The other guy is recognizable to the industry. Everybody knows what that is. It's as everybody expects it to be. Their diligence takes, 5 minutes to look at that and say, yep, that checks out, because you've done this creative thing nobody else has done. Now it's going to be hours and days of verifying things, and you've maybe done yourself a disservice. So to answer your question, there are preferable models. I prefer for any organization I'm working with to be within the zone of, this is what everybody expects to see. So when the buyer walks up, it doesn't cost extra time or money. It takes a very normal routine amount of time to confirm, oh yeah, this is a standard DSO model, private equity backed model. We understand it. Okay, next question. And maybe to be specific, because I think you asked, to me, what it is you got a holding company on the top. And that's where the investors and the doctors and anybody that owns it, their investment sits there. Below the holding company is the DSO. That's the operating company that actually provides non-clinical support services. And then below the DSO, and here's the only variation, you might just have clinical entities that own and operate dental practices, and that might be it. Or you might have a couple joint ventures under there where you actually share, the profits with a minority owner, as well. So, but that all happens under the holdco, DSO, and then either you've got joint venture entities or you go right down to the clinical entities, under that structure. But either one of those two structures is pretty much the only thing I'm recommending for anybody. There are several, again, AJ, I don't even want to contaminate anybody's mind on this show about it. There are others you could do, but they result in confusion and more diligence and more time and more effort. I really don't recommend them.
The challenge that we've seen in DSOs often around getting doctors to produce at the highest and best level is you've got to make sure that they're compensated properly, adequately, and the incentives have to be aligned appropriately for them to be happy, right? And if the doctors are not happy, you don't have anything, right? Because the doctor's the one producing. Now, if you
You're talking
don't
a
get
rule number one, right? Rule number one of DSOs is you got to get along with your affiliated dentist. Rule number two is you got to put patients in the seats. And rule number three is what we're talking about now. You got to follow the regulations on your structure and your agreements and implementations. I think you're talking about rule number one, though. Got to get along with your affiliated dentist.
Yeah. And part of getting along with them is, yes, obviously clinical autonomy, that's a given. You've got to create an environment where they're feeling supported, that's a given. But a big part of what makes a doctor happy is going to be their financial compensation, their guaranteed compensation, their bonuses, and their whatever equity compensation, JV or otherwise, whole second bite, all that stuff. Where have you seen problems if you don't figure this out early on in this, what doctor comp is, right, through legal agreements? What kind of trouble can these DSOs get into eventually, either because doctors leave because they didn't get what was expected? Like how important it is to kind of get those expectations memorialized in an agreement first so that you are all aligned and everybody's working towards the same goal of, great, whatever you're trying to build a great DSO.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions there, and they're all really important questions that you asked. I mean, I'll try, if I miss one, come back to it. But, the first issue is, this is really important. And if you mess this up, it can be devastating to your organization, losing talent. I mean, there's a shortage of dentists to begin with. And, dentists, what I always say is, the great equalizer or the great limiter, like water in the desert, is you might have a great business plan, you might have funding, you might have the ability to have 10 chairs in your office, but if you can only hire 2 dentists, well, you're going to be limited. There's nothing you can do. You can't, until someday, the AI is allowed to be a dentist or something. I don't know if we're headed there, but unless we get to there, as long as human beings are required to be dentists, if you don't got them, that's a big limiting factor on your ability to grow and bring in revenue. So one, it's critical. It's probably the most critical thing. I've seen people make egregious regulatory errors, but their dentists love them and they've been able to work through those situations. But if your dentists don't love you or like you and they're leaving, it's a really big problem. So, that's the first thing. The second thing is, you got to memorialize it in writing. I do encounter, occasionally, fairly even, regularly, people that have dentists that don't have employment agreement. I would never, ever, under any circumstance, do that. And sometimes people say, look, there's a labor shortage. This is the only terms under which these people would work. It's kind of a handshake. That's all I've got. And, I guess if that's all you can do, but if you don't have an employment agreement, they can basically leave for any reason. They could probably compete with you right across the street. They could probably hire your employees away from you to go with them if you don't have customary terms like non-competes, non-solicitations, and things that would be found in an employment agreement. So, one, you got to have an agreement. I mean, you're really taking an oversized risk if you don't. And then 2, your agreement's got to have the right stuff in it. I would hope your agreement would have the following. It would have protections of your intellectual property. It would have confidentiality obligations. It would have non-solicitation of your patients, non-solicitation of your employees, non-competes, within reason, within reasonable geography to your area. I would also hope it would have a comp structure that would make that person want to stay. Not just the typical percent of collections, but maybe some opportunity for, at a minimum, bonus, maybe an opportunity for shares or profit sharing in the future. I mean, this is the time to kind of put that stuff together.
What would you say to groups? Brian, Dykema and I have a lot of work together on this. It's so common to doctors pay themselves through 1099 versus W-2. And can you kind of speak to the trials and tribulations of that decision and the downstream implications when they try to do an exit?
So I'm going to give you the easy version. Okay. There are regulations that we could go over on a detailed, robust thing like the IRS tests and all this stuff. I've read them all. as a 30-year lawyer, and let me just make it real simple for you. It's like 95% of the time you got to be a W-2. Okay, I mean, I don't know if it's 93 or 94, but to put it as simply as I can, 95% of the time you got to be a W-2. My net outcome of reading all these regulations and all these papers are, if you've got a practice and you need an oral surgeon 1 or 2 days a month, and that oral surgeon has their own private practice of their own, and they're just coming to your office like, a day or two a month, okay, yep, you could be a 1099 in that situation. But if anybody is working with you, like either part-time or full-time, where they're either, your practice is their only gig, either it's part-time, full-time, but you're the only person they're working for, it's got to be a W-2, like no exceptions. Like people come in, they're like, what if they work through their own professional corporation? Nope, don't work. I mean, they could say, we're working through our PC. Your PC employs our PC. That's very nice. But if all you do is work for that organization, it's got to be a W-2. So that's, the short, simple, sweet, answer. In fact, I'd say don't do it. Don't make them like, if you want a simple rule for this thing, don't do 1099 unless your lawyer says you can do a 1099. Feel free to do a W-2 anytime you want to do a W-2. Don't do a 1099 unless, a paid advisor, somebody that knows what they're doing, tells you it's okay. With respect to your other question, like what happens if you just did it anyway? Well, bad things can happen. One, you could pay severe penalties to the Department of Labor, to the IRS, and depending on how many employees you have. And I've seen this happen 2 ways, both of them not terrific, where I was representing the buyer and we went to an organization and everybody was pretty much a 1099 when they needed to be a W-2. In one of the instances, they just walked the deal. They just said, we're not doing this. It's an oversized risk. We're just not going to do it. Another one, they made a giant holdback. They just said, and if I remember that deal, it was a couple $100 million deal, and they literally held back something like $20 million. It was like they went to their lawyers and they said, like, what do you think the liability could be here? And their lawyers were like, well, on the worst case scenario, we could think about it's maybe like 10 or 15 million. They said, fine, we're doing 20. They took whatever the worst case was and they juiced it up even more. And they said, we're just holding this back. And then they said, okay, what is the statute of limitations on this labor stuff? And somebody said 2 or 3 years or whatever it was. And they said, we're detaining this money for a full 3 years until we're certain that there won't be any questions or any issues. So, the consequences, to answer your question, could be very, very significant if you're doing 1099 and you should be a W-2 and now you try to exit.
Yeah, I'd reinforce that message. I think the overwhelming majority of private equity buyers, it's not an option. And you're going to get an adjusted EBITDA number to convert at best. That's at best. At worst, what Brian's mentioned on a holdback plus on that front in terms of getting this right in the front end.
On that note, Brian, have you ever encountered in all the deals you've done on the sell side, where a legal issue kind of at the very end or process actually whittled down the valuations? There was something legal that kind of said, oh no, we were going to pay you 100 million, but now we're going to pay you 90 million because either your agreement, either you're obviously not in compliance, that could be a liability, or your agreements are in violation, so that could be a liability, or your doctor comp model is so messed up that we'll have to restructure all that stuff, and then that's why we need a one turn haircut. Is there like weird that you have experienced?
All of the above. Everything you've said and then some. I think we talked about on another one of these. I've done like north of 1,700 deals. I think marketing said I'm allowed to say like in 30 years, like 1,700. Yeah, I've seen all of that. I've seen it where, there's labor. I've seen it. I'll just go through some highlights. I've seen it where there's a lawsuit and we can't assess the liability. It's not covered by insurance. And, the plaintiff is claiming some crazy number like 20 or $30 million. And we're like, that can't really be right. That sounds crazy, but we can't rule it out either. And I've seen that, crater a deal or end up in a big holdback. Okay, I've seen it where there's a regulatory investigation. Maybe you take Medicaid and, the OIG has come in, or maybe, it's just the State Department of Labor, or maybe it's the HIPAA, the OIG coming in to investigate HIPAA or something. And we've looked at it and we've just said, wow, there was one recently. The last big deal that we're in a bit of an M&A drought. The last major deal I was looking at before we got into these drought conditions kind of cratered over a state attorney general investigation. The attorney general was investigating, a DSO for a certain billing practice where, their allegation was you should be billing here, but you were upselling to here. And I felt like it was defensible, but nobody could really, definitively say it was all going to be okay. And it resulted in, cratering the deal and not being able, to proceed. Other times, there's other regulatory issues. Like we said, you put them all as 1099 and they need to be, W-2. And like AJ says, in the best case, they're going to assess the full price of converting everybody and seeing what that might represent. In the worst case, they might be uncomfortable, and not do the deal. And yeah, I'll never forget this. I'll tell this story. I don't know. You sometimes said you wanted to tell some stories on this show. I'll tell a story. I had a deal, and this was, say maybe 5 years ago, this one that I'm recalling, because you were asking about the timing. And the timing is always at the worst. I would say like Murphy's Law, it's always the worst time. But in this case, we had a deal going, and it was like 2 days before closing. Everything, had been checked out. At that point, it was fairly smooth. I mean, there were things we had to work out, but everything was all set. The bank gave approval to draw on the funds and do the deal. And a Medicaid investigation letter came in 2 days before. And it was just, it just came in and they disclosed it, and it just cratered that, it ended up cratering, the entire deal. And, so I've seen them literally at the 11th hour, Amol come in and, mess everything up. It's why, I don't want people to despair. It's why you got to, in the advance, do the homework. Because I think the point of this, you guys tell me you're the host of this show, but I think one of the points of this is to counsel people on best practices and how to do it. So what I would say, instead of me just trying to depress people with these war stories, is say, if you do the homework and you prepare your organization properly for the sale, you would have seen all these things in advance, and the likelihood of some, 11th hour thing coming in and derailing it is very, very low at that point. I mean, it's probably not going to happen. It's up there with hitting pots on slot machines and getting struck by lightning if you do things, all the prep work. A lot of people, just rush to market and they don't do all the prep work. So these things tend to come up, and it seems like they're just dropping out of the sky. It's the example I use sometimes, AJ and Amol, is like, I'm sure too, the primitive, human beings, like the cavemen, when they got up and they walked out of the cave and it was raining that day, they were like, oh my God, it like dropped from the heavens. How could this happen? Or it's, 100 degrees or it's 30 degrees. Well, we got weather satellites now. So we're not like surprised too much. Like, we know when it's going to be hot, when it's going to be cold, when there's going to be, some type of thunderstorm is going to come. We don't think like, the weather gods are angry. Like, we kind of know what's going to happen. And I tell people when I'm counseling them to get ready for a sale, do you want to be a caveman, or do you want to be 2025 weather satellites and you got GPS and everything that's going on? Now, every now and then with GPS and a weather satellite, there might be an unexpected thing, but it's a tiny little blip versus you're just shocked and you had no idea, what was going to happen. So, I think the part of us all being together here is to talk about best practices, and you got to put in the work before going to market. And if you do those things, you're going to be like a weather satellite. Then the likelihood of anything really surprising or shocking you is going to be very, very low. Whereas if you don't do that and you just, rush to market, it's just kind of like, you don't know what's going to pop up and when it's going to pop up.
Let's say you're planning to go to market, and maybe it's wishful thinking for 2025, but let's say you are. And let's say it's December. Let's just say it post at the very end, and you've got like 4, 5, 6 months to kind of get prepared. You starting this. What's one big idea? What's one thing you would tell a client that comes to you? Hey, going to market this December.
Okay, I'll tell you exactly what it is and things that I recommend and the people that, not everybody says yes. All I can do is ask people and counsel people and they got to make their decisions. But the two things that are absolutely critical that we do. One will do a sell side quality of earnings. Okay. Yeah, I know it's going to be 15 grand and maybe you don't feel like spending that. And I'm sorry. But if you do a sell side QofE, you'll know the likelihood of being shocked. Like I thought my EBITDA was $5 million and they say it's $1.5 million. I mean, that happens when you don't do a sell side QofE. Like shocking, like AJ's bought many practices, and how many times you see a seller, they're like, AJ, my EBITDA is 3 million. And you're like, sorry, buddy, it's 500,000 at best. And they're like shocked. They don't believe it. They go into the steps of denial and it becomes a problem. If you do a sell side QofE, you're not. You might be off 100 grand or 50 grand where reasonable minds can differ, but the prospect of you thinking it's 5 million and it's really 1 million will not happen if you do a sell side QofE. So that's one step. I guess we've got to come up with these big ideas. That's one big idea. The other big idea that I have is we do a comprehensive, top to bottom regulatory analysis of the organization. We look, I think it's like 56 things. We look at some things we discussed here, structure agreements, implementation, advertising and marketing, labor and employment. I mean, a whole bunch of things we go through and we'll flag issues. And if we do it 6 months before, guess what? We can fix all of these issues. Like if you're selling your house and you do a sell side inspection, you don't wait for the buyer to come in and tell you those pipes are busted. You do your own and you get it fixed. So by the time the buyer comes in, you're like, oh yeah, it's all taken care of. Same thing on this. We can come in and I might find, and I've had this happen and it ended really well, like a good story. I gave you some war stories. I'll give you a good war story. I had an organization a couple of years ago we sold. I told them about this and I said, I promise it will be better for you if we do this. And we came in and we found like 30, 40 problems. Like this thing would not have been saleable, but they did it 6, 7 months before. We methodically fixed every last thing. And then I issued a regulatory report, that they had in writing. It goes right in the data room right there that said they got a clean bill of health. And when they went to their sale process, everybody thanked them. Like they pulled the report. They said, these were all the questions we had. Thank you for answering them. And the interesting thing is nobody said, it was just funny. They didn't. When did you fix this? Like, did you just fix this 6 months ago? Nobody asked that. They just went through and said, hey, everything is as it needs to be today. That's good enough for us. Let's go ahead and proceed. So, the two big ideas that I would have, sell side QofE and doing a comprehensive top to bottom regulatory analysis so you can flag any issues well in advance, fix them, and get a memo that you put in the file. Because I don't write the memo till I fix it. I mean, I'm not going to write a memo that said I showed up and it was a mess. I'm going to show up, look at it, fix it all, and then say, as of this date, we fixed everything and everything looks good.
I mean, as someone that was business trained, thought I knew it all, coming from business consulting, it was the biggest learning that everything Brian said is so true. And when at my first recap, it wasn't the business advisors that were my lifesaver. It was the Brian and helping me through that process. I can't emphasize that enough. I don't think I knew how little I knew of the status of my organization. And I had worked with some of the best, including Dykema, and still had room for improvement. And it was just invaluable to go through that process and would not have transacted without it.
I mean, because we know now, because AJ was a pioneer, like he'd been around, you were running through the Wild West. People are shooting at you, you're dodging under things. It's much more simple. Like we know, we've learned from a lot of these things. Every now and then we'll get surprised here and there, but we pretty much know the rules of the road. We got paved roads now. We're not on like dirt roads with bumps and stuff. So if somebody, all they got to do is engage the right folks in 2025. Back when AJ started his organization, or I've been here 30 years, we didn't even know who the right folks were. We didn't know what was coming around that corner. Now we've got that, like we know what's coming around the corner. We know, I'd say once every 5 or 6 years, I see something that I'm like, well, I haven't seen that before, but it's exceedingly rare. Like it doesn't happen. I've mostly seen it. So if somebody's able to get the right advisors and give themselves enough time and do these things, we can really make a fairly smooth process. I mean, in 2025. Because we've learned from all the wild west stuff that AJ and I did back. We filed that all in our brain and we've learned all those lessons.
Brian, it's always such a pleasure, talking not just the legal aspect of the business, but the business aspect of the business. And it's so important because, you can draft all the agreements in the world, you can do all the compliance stuff in the world, but if you don't know where the things could go wrong and you don't know where people have actually faltered and made lots of mistakes, you having represented people in all the states and in Canada and in Europe now, um, is there like an overarching business lesson, as a lawyer? I'm asking you. Maybe you get a bonus question. Is like overarching business, if somebody is in this DSO business today, and they need to really they have big dreams, aspirations of building it into a big one, selling it for a lot of money, 10x exit, um, is over besides the legal stuff, is what do you tell people that this, guys, this is it, this is 30 years of crystallization, this is what you need to be?
I'll give it to you real quick. Pick the right partner. I know AJ's
Amen.
going to shake his head on that.
Amen
Pick
for
the
that.
right partner. Whether it's an investment partner, like if you've built the organization and the time has, I would say, look, if you're a dentist and you're just forming some practices, but you're not going to do it by yourself, you're going to get like another dentist as your partner, pick the right partner. You pick the wrong, because I've seen it at the molecular level and I've seen it with, like two dentists that get together and have 2 or 3 offices. You pick the wrong partner, it's going to be a disaster. Pick the right partner. I've seen it when now you've built 10 or 15 offices and you're going to market. Pick the right partner. You pick the wrong partner, you might have a life of misery. You might say, gosh, if I pick the right partner and they pay me a couple $1 million less than the other person, but it's the right partner, I'll never regret that decision. If I pick the wrong partner and they pay me several $1 million more, but they're the wrong partner, I'll dread coming to work every single day that I come to work. So, pick the right partner. And just another second on that, it takes work. Like if somebody says, well, that's nice, Brian, but what does that mean? Do your diligence, spend the time to get to know the person is what it means. People, like I said, they come up to me sometimes at, dental conferences and places where I speak, and they'll say something like, people that I just met, like, Brian, who should I partner with? And I'll look at them like, it's like you just asked me who you should marry. I guess if you're like a good friend of mine and I've known like Amol and I've known you for decades or something, I might have some opinions on what might be good for you. But if I just met you in 5 minutes, I can't tell you who to marry. And it's the same thing with this business. You got to understand, what is your style? What type of management style do you have? What type of style do you want in a manager that's now managing you? Because remember, if you founded your organization, you don't maybe have a manager. Maybe you're the owner. You're your own manager now for the first time in decades or your life. You might have somebody managing you. And if your personality doesn't match with theirs or their management style doesn't match with yours, it's going to be terrible. It might be like you were a free horse running around and then somebody put a leash on you and now you can't, it might be a terrible, situation. So you got to spend the time to learn about yourself. Okay, learn it. And there's, I'm not telling people to do this or not do this, but if you don't know, there are business coaches or people you can consult with that'll sort of tell you about yourself, what fits good with you. That's what you got to figure out. And then you got to figure out what type of partner that's going to be your partner or manager, is going to fit well with you. And it's hard. Like, it shouldn't be easy. Like, this is your life's work that you're selling. It shouldn't be like, hey, AJ, that's cool. I spent 20 years building this thing. I'm going to sell it in 10 minutes, man. Easy come, easy go. It can't be that way. It's got to be like, I spent 20 years building this. Now, I'm not going to spend 20 years trying to pick a partner, but I'm sure as heck going to spend a couple months and really do a deep dive into myself and somebody else. It can't be like I put like the LOIs out there and, I got one back and the price is good. So that's it. That's good enough for me. The people that have done there's, you can find anybody on anything. There's a couple that did that and they got lucky and it worked out. But a lot of the people that just looked at that and just picked the highest bidder or just picked somebody off a piece of paper on an LOI, they got real unhappy, later down the line. And I get the phone calls and it's a shame sometimes to see people, they've sold their life's work and they're unhappy. So it's got to be hard. You got to spend the time to learn about yourself and also learn about what you want in a partner. So that's what I mean when I say pick the right partner.
So incredible. And I've been listening to you the last 30 minutes, Brian, and Had I had access to this information 17 years ago, I think the business I built, which was pretty big, would be 5 times its size, and I would have spent millions less in
The
fixing
first mover,
mistakes
you
through
were
the
a
road.
pioneer, AJ. And the first
And
mover always, you had like that machete. You had to cut
That's
through the
right.
weeds
That's
to
right.
get out there. So, and AJ, for those that have built a world-class organization, look, could it possibly have been better if woulda, coulda, shoulda, maybe, but you were a pioneer, AJ. I got to say that for everybody right now.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. And we can't be more excited for the Dykema conference, August 6th through the 8th, the pre-conference for the 10X workshop. Be sure to sign up for those that are listening. And again, Brian, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Guys,
Brian.
thanks. I'm really this is people that are listening before we wrap this up. This 10X workshop is going to be incredible. So, everything I've been saying, the work that Amol and AJ are putting in here, they're not going to come on here and brag about themselves, but they are putting tons of work into this. And I think this is going to be one of the most comprehensive things I've ever seen. And I've been doing this 30 years. I'm not easily impressed by stuff, but I am very impressed with what Amol and AJ have done. And I can't wait to see this thing unfold.
Thank you, Brian. We appreciate
Thank
your
you, Brian.
support and what you have done for this industry. It's truly exemplary. And there's no comparison to it actually, in modern times, in either legal profession or any other profession. So thank you again for everything that you do on a daily basis, to make all of us better in everything that we do. Thanks again, guys.
Thanks.